Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, allegations that South African soldiers are unlawfully serving in the Israeli occupation army in the current genocide that is happening in Gaza has come under the juristic spotlight, in the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. Now, the applicants, Safoudien Bester, a Palestinian Solidarity Activist, and Ziyaad Patel, a South African attorney and human rights defender, turned to the court in a bid to obtain several orders to hold South Africa accountable to its international and other obligations. Several arms of government, as well as the National Director of Public Prosecutions, the Department of Home Affairs, and the police are cited among the 10 correspondents. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Ziyaad Patel himself. Ziyaad, always good having you on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me on your program.
No.
This is a milestone as you've introduced this important case that has been launched in the Pretoria High Court. It is a case that is something that has happened over many years of work in putting these court records or putting these complaint records together. And as I've mentioned before, is that this is a culmination of work that dates back to 2008-2009, the first war in Gaza under Operation Cast Lead, where the Israel and the IDF were already allegedly accused and implicated of war crimes. War crimes meaning that there's the disproportionate use of force and the indiscriminate targeting of a civilian population in their carrying out of military activities. And this culture of impunity is something that we've targeted from 2008-2009. Initially, it was done through the Gaza docket and carried on, through the Mavi Marmara when there was a flotilla aid mission in 2010. And of course, we know that there's been wars happening over the last decade in Gaza. People of Palestine and in Gaza have not had any peace. With the constant targeting, the constant aerial bombardments, and just, the normal kind of airstrikes that happens in between these wars that occur. And unfortunately, we have South African nationals and citizens supported by Zionist institutions that are facilitating this kind of recruitment into the IDF. So, a profile of South African nationals and citizens are around the ages of 18 when they've just finished school and wanting to look at going to a university. They are given the opportunity of bursaries or going to an Israeli so-called, university there to study. And but part of that must be that they must serve in the IDF. And this is normally done through unlawful rendering of military service in violation of our laws.
Ziyaad, I'm going to touch on Aaron Bayhack because, of course, his name has been mentioned quite a number of times as a recent South African to have joined the genocide that is happening in Gaza. But we'll touch on that in the next segment. You've mentioned 2008, 2009, and I remember that it was a deadly, war that broke out there in Gaza. This is not something new. And I think it's important for people to understand that we've been having South Africans that have been going and fighting on behalf of Israel since then. And of course, this was, years into the occupation that is currently happening in Gaza and the starvation. And when I use the word starvation, of course, the blockade of many basic human right necessities that the residents of Gaza have been denied.
Indeed, this is a problem that has arisen from that time. And I've mentioned on many occasions that we should not be surprised about what is currently happening or when we've witnessed in real time the genocide. It is because Israel, both at the international community and at a local or national level, have been in some way or the other protected from any kind of prosecution or investigation. And in fact, the protection goes to the covering of this kind of actions of impunity. So impunity has existed from that period of time. And when you don't hold an Israeli government to account for the crimes perpetrated with impunity. This is the end result of it. Now, if you look at putting this court application into perspective, it is a culmination, as I've mentioned, of many previous criminal complaints. And yes, the 2009 war was extremely deadly. We've seen images of kinds of banned munitions that were used, white phosphorus, dime bombs, and many other kinds of substances in a densely populated, civilian areas. And this is what the situation is. You have a densely civilian population that is continuously targeted by, weapons of warfare and armaments that are conventional armaments. And the majority of those that will be the victims. The victims are casualties. The majority are victims. And this relates to civilian population. This also culminates in the kind of war crimes that we've spoken about in many instances in the past. And this is added to in terms of the terror-related activities that we've included in the South African Zionist Terrorism Corridor Probe, which puts a spotlight of how Zionist institutions are being, used to further these kinds of crimes. So you've got, for instance, we have the attack in Lebanon, where you had the pager attack. And this pager attack was against the civilian population. And these are banned munitions that are used, that is completely prohibited in terms of the Terrorism Act, because South Africa is also party to anti-terrorism conventions. And we've raised an alert to this, that these institutions that facilitate the procurement of these nationals are also then need to be investigated under the anti-terrorism laws. We've got, for instance, the Jewish National Fund, which I've spoken extensively about. They are involved in raising funds through a KKL program that continues to dispossess Palestinians of their homes in the West Bank and in the Palestinian territories. And we've overseen the current real-time genocide that is ongoing. Now, this culture of impunity has existed, and the international community has not addressed it in any way. In fact, the international community, the American government, the European government, gives Netanyahu the kind of blanket carte blanche to do as he pleases in terms of what we're currently seeing in Gaza, in terms of this new security plan that is emanating. And this goes completely against what Palestinian rights stand for: the right of self-determination, the right for the freedom and aspiration for their own right to self-determination. And this is something that we need to continue. We also need to distinguish between these rights of the right of resistance, which has been criminalized in the international community. The fact that we have the international community talking about no Hamas to be involved in Gaza is a complete, it's a complete taking out of the rights of Palestinians, the essential rights of Palestinians to decide for themselves who should govern, the right for self-determination, the right to determine their own authority.
Ziyaad, I want to get to the crux of this case. So it's yourself and Safoudien Bester. Is there anyone that has planned to join as part of your case? Obviously, there's two of you at this very moment, because there's been a big voice within the South African community, those who, of course, are pro-Palestine voices, to go ahead and bring up these South Africans who are joining the Israeli army, whether they are in the Gaza genocide as Israeli soldiers there or in the occupied West Bank. And it's important for us not to forget about the occupied West Bank, because as we speak right now, displacements at quite a high level are happening in that part of Palestine.
Yes, the displacements continue, or the incremental genocide, the pogroms in the occupied Palestinian territories of the West Bank is certainly of growing concern, and it's something that's been happening over a period of time, over many decades. In terms of the criminal complaints were represented by certain solidarity organizations, including Safoudien Bester. I represented Safoudien Bester around the period of 2018 when the matter came to my office, and this was in relation to an initial criminal complaint that he had lodged in Cape Town against a certain individual by the name of Dean Samuel Goodson, who went to serve in the IDF in the 2014 war. There are UN fact-finding mission reports that state that the IDF was implicated and alleged to have been involved in war crimes in 2014. The death toll was quite significant as well. So there's a history between myself and Safoudien Bester as the first applicant. There were criminal complaints that were jointly lodged by the Media Review Network, by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign in Cape Town, as well as Safoudien. And the decision was made that, he wanted to take this case forward to court because we had seen no forward traction. In fact, a complete disconnect between what South Africa is doing on the international platform and what has been their overall attitude when it came to enforcement on a national jurisdictional level. The fact that we continue to have South Africans serving, going with utter impunity to Israel, leaving the territorial borders, going to serve in a real-time genocide and coming back, and no indications that investigations are going in a positive manner or indications that there'll be prosecutions. The decision was made that he wants to take this now to the High Court. Just to give your viewers, insight into what had happened last year, I was in Cape Town.
Yeah,
And
Ziyaad,
we also have...
Ziyaad, I have to stop
Yes.
you there because we're going to continue.
Sure.
When you're going to continue that, because I want to touch on, of course, you've made quite an important one regarding national jurisdiction and, of course, South Africa on the international stage, especially with the ICJ case. My conversation with Ziyaad Patel continues after this break. Welcome back to News in Focus. Apologies, Ziyaad, for cutting you off there. But Ziyaad, to where you left off, I want to add this question to it also. You mentioned something important with regards to national jurisdiction. And when we see South Africa, of course, on the international stage, I beg your pardon, mentioning its support for Palestine, especially when it comes to the International Court of Justice case. How big of a contradiction is that, given that South African citizens can still walk into the Israeli army and nothing's really going to happen to them, obviously, up until now?
It's very clear, and I think that is the stark contrast between what South Africa has been doing on an international platform. And I don't want to undermine the sincerity of individuals within the South African government that has undertaken this task selflessly and brought this case on the international platform. And I don't think we must in any way take, or say that this, there's clear outright hypocrisy. I think that was an important position. It still remains a critical position that our government has undertaken in the midst of a genocide, and looking at other countries like Arab countries, for instance, or any other countries that failed to do anything, whereas our country had undertaken it on the international platform. So I think that must be lauded. However, we need to get this disconnect to be addressed seriously and appropriately, because the genocide application or invoking the Genocide Convention and the protection of rights and so forth that happened in 2023, and rightfully so. But there is a historical record of criminal complaints dating back to 2008, 2009 that hasn't seriously been addressed. I did receive some positive traction when I represented Khadija Davids in 2010, and that was in collaboration with our Turkish counterparts in the Mavi Marmara, where we managed to get warrants of arrest that were issued out of the Turkish court to be effected here. And we received from our South African police services hawks that if any of those naval commanders had entered the territory of South Africa, there would be a red alert and they would be extradited to face criminal charges. And I think that was some positive movement or traction that we had received. But subsequent to that, we haven't received anything positive, despite the number of criminal complaints that have been lodged. And South Africa is not only in terms of the legislative framework able to exercise what you would call customary universal jurisdiction. We went and legislated their own statute. That in fact gives us broader mandate and availability of our right that any person like Netanyahu or others that come to the territory of the country can be prosecuted for committing a crime, even if it's committed extraterritorially. I've asked the authorities, based on the fact that the International Criminal Court had issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, the former defense minister, to give us an indication that if they ever enter the territory of South Africa, they would be extradited to the ICC to face criminal charges. And I haven't received a response from the authorities, despite the fact that South African government lodged at least over 200 pages of a memorial record of crimes that have been perpetrated by the state of Israel against the Palestinian people for further investigation. And we're talking about here egregious crimes. So the heart of this court application comes back to criminal complaints even lodged recently in 2022, the South African Zionist Terrorism Corridor Probe, our extension of the corridor probe into genocide on the back of South Africa's submissions that were made internationally, and also the supplementing of number of accused suspects, nationals and citizens that we have, that's contained in an executive summary and was supplemented further last year. We have an individual by the name of Aaron Bayhak.
Yeah, I wanted to bring his name, Ziyaad. Ziyaad, I wanted to bring his name into this, because, I mean, he's been one of the names that, of course, have been mentioned as a South African who is fighting for the Israeli army in the Gaza genocide. I wanted to know, what is the progress with regards to that? Because the last I heard, there was an investigation, but that's about where it stopped.
Yes, and that's what we continuously receive from our authorities, that a matter is under investigation. I mean, for how long our matter is going to be under investigation? Understandably, that our authorities that want to bring criminal charges or institute criminal proceedings have to attain admissible evidence against the accused suspects, and that has to be prosecuted in a court of law. That's well and accepted. That we have this arm of government, which is our investigative authorities, that needs to be directed by our NPA when it comes to the nature of these kinds of egregious crimes. That there needs to be competent investigations into these alleged crimes that we raise in these criminal complaints, and there must be resources and availability, and of course the will, and not undue influence in any way to conduct proper and constructed investigations that then become finalized and submitted for a decision on whether to prosecute or not. And we're not receiving any of that at this point in time. And this is the impetus of this application, because, for instance, Aaron Bayhak I would look at one of our very strong suspects. He was alleged to be part of a ghost unit, or called the Al-Brain unit, or part of the IDF paratroopers. And they were actually geolocated by a Palestinian journalist, Yunus Tarawi.
Yes.
From the middle of Gaza all the way to Khan Yunis, Al-Quds Hospital, how they moved their way forward. This unit was responsible with team members, called 20 people per team, 2 persons, responsible for 5 kills. And this was indiscriminately done. They were in areas where there was dense civilian population. Palestinians did not know that there was a sniping unit within their distance of at least 1.2 kilometers. If you were a Palestinian boy and you are adult military age, you may become a prime suspect to just be simply targeted. They targeted Palestinian victims. When families and friends tried to save the victims, they were also sniped and killed. We saw this targeting around hospitals particularly. And this kind of conduct and impunity continues with journalists, as we've seen. It continues at food points. It continues in the way they've conducted themselves in Lebanon on the pager attack, or for instance, the targeting of political leaders of Hamas, like Ismail Haniyeh in the Islamic Republic of Iran, which falls squarely within the definition of terrorism and global state terrorism that has been exported. And this case brings into the spotlight these complicit Zionist institutions,
Right.
as well as the recruitment
Ziyaad-
structure that they're undergoing.
Ziyaad, I have to stop you there because we've just got 2 minutes. Ziyaad, is there a time frame that you've given yourself along with Safoudien in terms of some sort of ruling that the court may give?
So what we've done is, it's been a tedious process. The application itself is about over 1,200 pages because it also includes, foreign resolutions and so forth, and as well the ICJ judgments. It's an application that is brought in the High Court. It's brought under a notice of motion. At this period in time, we have now served the notice of motion on the presidency and 10 respondents, including ministries, departments, and organs of state, particularly the National Director's Office, as well as the Department of Home Affairs, the police. Also importantly, very quickly, I want to mention, we've got evidence from the record as well as from the National Conventional Arms Control Committee that no applications were ever made within the Regulation of Foreign Military Assistance Act for any person or South African going to serve in the IDF. And I've also, stated that mercenary activities is strictly forbidden. So we've strengthened this case. We brought it under the application. Currently, there's going to be a notice of opposition which has been filed, and there's going to be an answering affidavit by all 10 respondents. This is expected in the month of December. Thereafter, we have the opportunity to file our answering affidavits. So we're probably looking at this case, if ever coming to court, it's going to be probably in the latter part of next year, depending on how we evaluate the response by the state, whether it's going to be obstructionist litigation or whether they're going to want to constructively deal with the issues that we put in our notice of motion. And, the notice of motion states that we want a decision on Dean Samuel Goodson. We're wanting to act without fear, favor, or prejudice, impartially. That must be done within 2 months of granting of the order. We want a national security framework to be put in place to create a proper crime deterrence factor, reconnaissance and surveillance of individuals that go or are suspected of serving in the IDF, to completely and once and for all end this kind of culture of impunity of both nationals and individuals, as well as complicit Zionist institutions involved in egregious crimes, promotion and advancement of terrorism and related activities, exporting terrorism activities, and in nationals and citizens going to serve, as well as which we had a situation last year where IDF personnel that serve in Gaza commit atrocities, actually come to South Africa, they come to Cape Town and go and have a vacation there. And we brought this and alerted our authorities to this. This is another person by the name of Uri Shehadan. And our authorities, our police, failed to constructively act despite information that we're giving to them. So hopefully this case, inshallah, is about wanting to have forward traction so that we see positive cooperation and positive outcomes.
Ziyaad, absolute pleasure having you, and shukran so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you for having me on your show. Shukran.
Absolute pleasure. That's Ziyaad Patel, South African attorney and human rights lawyer. Of course, he's one of the applicants in this case, which, of course, they've put through to government with regards to South Africans serving in the Israeli army. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus. We'll be back again on Monday from myself, Ross Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. If you've missed today's episode, you'll be sure to find it on our YouTube channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.